How much should a video game cost? According to Nintendo, for their new Switch 2, that answer is $79.99. When I first heard that, my immediate reaction was essentially, yeah, that's logical. This opinion is not shared by most gamers, however, if online sentiment is any indication. Lots of accusations of Nintendo being greedy, the games and console being overpriced, and general negativity. At least, more than usual. However, even after some time, my initial opinion remains unchanged. Based on my current knowledge of both the state of the game industry and Nintendo's business operations, a 90 to over 100 USD price tag on Switch 2 games in stores is a fairly logical possibility in the future. After all, there is a very high chance that launch prices will be increased due to the recent tariff increase by the US on many countries, including Japan. In other words, yes, I am indeed saying that all those people are wrong, and this video is here to explain why. Jokes aside, here are some important disclaimers. This video isn't intended to defend Nintendo's stance or accuse people of being cheapskates. However, this is also not to lambast Nintendo or support any calls for a price change. In fact, I have literally zero emotions or feelings about pricing matters whatsoever. I maintain an attitude of total and absolute neutrality because I am simply emotionally dead inside whenever I have to do anything that involves economics or business analysis. I've stared at so many financial, industry, and company reports throughout my MBA that not even Nintendo can elicit a modicum of excitement from me for financial analysis. My heart lies in games and design, not finance. My brain can handle that. Or maybe my liver. Goodness knows I could use a drink sometimes.
Aye, fair enough.
This video is also not here to justify the prices. All of us share the same love for games, but come from different countries and socio-economic backgrounds. Everyone's financial circumstances are different. A price change could impact some people comparatively more than others. Just being in a different country with a different economy can drastically impact your spending power. We cannot simply state, just admit that you're broke, or Nintendo is too greedy and call it a day. Anybody unironically saying these things needs to seriously widen their global perspective.
Y'all are stupid!
Nintendo is a Japanese company operating an international business on a global scale. They don't make decisions based on such simplistic blanket opinions. In fact, knowing the Japanese, they probably have meetings to schedule additional meetings. Simple answers like supply and demand also aren't going to cut it. You don't get paid just for basic high school economics. Whether you feel that Switch 2 games are worth the price is not what this video is about. This video is about the economics and game development related factors which led to this price point. It is an explanation, nothing more, nothing less. First, let us answer this question. What is the real price of a video game? Notice the capitalization. Before anything, we have a key term to define. If you look at Nintendo's website, you'll notice 4 letters innocuously placed after their $79.99 price tag, MSRP. This stands for Manufacturer Suggested Retail Price, and it means exactly what it sounds like. It is a recommended price from the manufacturer to the retailer on how much to sell a product for. This number is based on various factors like supply-demand forecasts, competitor pricing, market positioning, production costs, retailer profit margins, and so on. It does not, however, include tax. Taxes are added after. By the way, tariffs are a tax placed on imported goods, paid by the importing purchaser and usually passed down to the customer. They are not paid by the exporting manufacturer. I learned that in high school. I had no idea so many people didn't know how that worked. If you are an American watching this video, I am so sorry for you. Anyways, MSRP is important for retailers and distributors because they have a lot of inventory to manage. Different products from numerous sources are constantly being ordered, sold, discarded, refunded, restocked, rotated out, etc. Large-scale generalist retailers like Best Buy, Walmart, Takashimaya, Lotte Group, and so on don't have the time or expertise to evaluate and micromanage individual prices. So they rely heavily on the provided MSRP to help decide on their store pricing. To a lesser extent, we as consumers can use MSRP to gauge how much a product is worth, though most of us don't really check prices for general essentials like milk and eggs, except for that one time, I guess. We are more likely to check for big one-off expensive purchases like, I don't know, air fryers or something. Oh hey, that's a cute reference.
the sun in the palm of my hand.
However, note that the S in MSRP stands for suggestion. It is not a mandate. The manufacturer has no control over the retailer or distributor. They are totally free to ignore MSRP and set their own prices if they want to. Some retailers and distributors take advantage of high demand to charge high prices. For example, Bergsala, a Swedish distributor in the Nordic territories, is currently pricing their Switch 2s at 100 euros above MSRP. I also recall Microsoft pulled a similar stunt in Singapore back during the original Switch release years ago. Though take that with a grain of salt, I don't trust my own memory. Others will instead offer conditional discounts to encourage customers to purchase products online, register for services like Amazon Prime, as prizes for lucky draws or promotional events, and so on. Basically, if you walk into a store and buy the product directly, you pay at or above MSRP, giving the store their maximum revenue. If you participate in their promotional offer to get the discount, then you've successfully been pushed into registering for or using their service. Either way, it's a win-win for them, assuming they can actually sell the product and it doesn't sit on the shelf forever, that is. Anyways, the point is, due to assorted retailer shenanigans, individual shopping experiences will vary wildly and store-listed prices are not reliable as pricing data. However, since all retailers use MSRP as a foundation for their pricing strategies, MSRP can be a reliable measurement for estimating historical pricing data. Okay, now we can look at data. Time for the graph.
Giraffaric, the long-necked Pokemon. Giraffaric has a second head on its tail that bites those who approach it carelessly.
Ahem. Graph. This is a graph showing the average MSRP for each console, unfortunately only in USD. I'm not American myself, but the overwhelming majority of my viewer base is. Americans already cannot comprehend alternative measurement systems like metric, so for the sake of minimizing confusion, we are sticking with USD. Discounting the Atari era, we can actually see that prices have remained fairly stagnant across time. Game prices stayed at $49.99 MSRP from 1995 to 2005, from the PlayStation 1 to the Xbox. Then in 2005, the Xbox 360 and PS3 pushed MSRP to $59.99. Nintendo, however, continued to maintain the $49.99 MSRP for another 6 years throughout the Wii era, before increasing to $59.99 with the Wii U in 2012. MSRP then remained at $59.99 until 2020, where the PS5 and the Xbox whatever the hell it calls itself now pushed it to $69.99. And now, 5 years after that, in 2025, Switch 2 bumps it up to $79.99. If you are wondering why the graph doesn't include the Switch 2, well, that's because it was originally published in 2022, which is nice because it's guaranteed to be made before any sort of Switch 2 pricing bias would have existed. Alright, lots of numbers. What the hell does this all mean? My dear viewer, let me ask you this. When were you born? Well, according to my YouTube data, the majority of you are between 18 to 34 years old, so anywhere from 1991 to 2007. You've spent your entire lives knowing the price of a video game is either $49.99 or $59.99. You've grown used to that number. That price feels normal. Humans are creatures of predictability. Once something is ingrained into their minds as normal, they come to expect it to always be that way. People generally resist change and sometimes need to be dragged kicking and screaming into it. This is a huge reason why Nintendo's price hike feels like such a shock. It's a sudden change to something which has been a constant in your life. Even if you aren't the sort to get hung up over it, the price jump is still financially substantial. $20 over the Switch 1 standard of $59.99 is a 33% increase. That feels like a lot, because to some people, that is a lot. Remember, different countries have different earning power. It might be more reasonable if you notice the PS5 and Xbox Twitter's $69.99 MSRP, because that indicates a trend. After 5 years of that, one would think a price bump wouldn't be so bad. However, those consoles were released in 2020, the same year that the COVID pandemic began worldwide. Yeah, can't blame anyone for not paying attention to game prices then. There was a lot more important stuff on everyone's minds, to put it lightly. The listed number of a price has a significant impact on our psychology because it is the means through which we perceive value. This perception is also obscured by services and alternative alternative pricing models. Paid subscription services like Xbox Game Pass, Steam sales, microtransactions, gacha systems, collector's edition options, and many more divide the price of a game across multiple areas and prevent people from realizing just how much they are paying or how much value they are paying for. However, Nintendo doesn't do that. They list their prices upfront, the old-fashioned way. When you buy Mario, you pay the full price and you get the full game. Instead of paying small amounts for small incremental pieces of the pie, you pay for the whole pie. Next time anybody complains about missing the traditional game pricing model, point them at Nintendo because they've never stopped doing that. The sheer bluntness of this price really impacts people's perception. Nintendo's practice of never reducing their game prices over time also doesn't help this, because there is nothing which can mitigate that price. It makes the game price feel like something concrete and immovable, with no way to sneak around it. Nintendo makes game purchasing extremely straightforward to the customer. This is our price. If you want to play our game, you pay this price. That's it. However, price numbers alone do not reflect a product's actual value. Anyone who's studied basic economics knows where this is going. Inflation. How revolutionary. Truly, this is an excellent demonstration of everything I've learned from my MBA course. Unfortunately, this is the most logical place to start explaining stuff because it really is the key foundation for everything. So if you already know this, well, either skip ahead or bear with me for the benefit of those viewers who didn't study economics in high school. Alright, everyone's heard of inflation before. It's the magic word that people use to hand-wave why stuff keeps getting more expensive. Here's a very simplified explanation of how it works. Firstly, the total supply of money circulating within the economy gets increased. Either the central bank prints more money or interest rates are lowered. Lower interest rates subsequently reduce the cost of loans. Consumers and businesses pay less interest on loans, which means cheaper mortgages, auto loans, and business investment. In other words, it's cheaper to borrow from the bank to make big purchases like buying a house, which in turn means people have more money left over to spend on smaller purchases. Lower rates also mean reduced value in savings, so people are more inclined to spend money instead of keeping it in a bank. Either way, consumer and business spending increases. Because consumers and businesses are purchasing so many products, supply is unable to match demand. So businesses invest into their production capabilities to meet demand and better take advantage of the higher demand and profitability. Said rapid expansion is easier thanks to the aforementioned interest rates being lower, which make bank loans and investment costs cheaper. This results in both supply and quality of goods increasing due to investments producing advancements in technology, and the high consumer demand encourages businesses to compete more aggressively to dominate the market. Businesses expanding production capabilities also creates more jobs within the economy because companies need to hire more staff. More jobs means the total number of paychecks being distributed increases. Additionally, more jobs means employees have more options, giving them the freedom to quit lower-paying jobs in favor of ones with higher wages or better work conditions. Employers have little choice but to acquiesce and offer better pay to attract these workers. They need the staff more. All these increased wages and expanded production, in turn, increased production costs, which subsequently causes prices to increase. The rising prices of goods eventually decreases demand until it returns to equilibrium. However, there is still a higher supply of money circulating in the economy, leaving us with the end result of reduced value of money but a higher quantity and quality of goods within the economy as well. Now, that's the basic TLDR of the theory, but as every economist knows, reality does not match theory. There's a huge number of buts and ifs and other details I did not dive deeper into. For example, wages have grown but not as much as they are supposed to. Globalization means that certain industries are able to outsource many jobs overseas to keep prices lower than they are supposed to be. This meant that the overall economy continued to grow, but wages ended up stagnating and we get the mess we have today. But if we delve too deep into all the details, we'd be here forever, so let's just stay focused on our topic of game prices. Remember what I said about prices increasing as part of growth? Yeah, inflation isn't necessarily a bad thing. At moderate levels, it is actually a natural feature of a healthy, growing economy. An economy is driven by consumers spending money, which sustains and creates businesses, which creates more goods and jobs, which generates wages, which leads to more spending, and so on. As long as people continue to spend, inflation and economic growth will continue, even without the central bank's involvement. Yes, the value of each dollar decreases over time, but this is accompanied by increased quantity of dollars, improved product quality, technological advancements, and general quality of life. This is what happened with games. The world has come a long way since the time of the PlayStation in 1995. Various countries' economies around the world have grown significantly over the past 30 years, and inflation has occurred along with it. This is why the price of goods has increased over time. It rose alongside wages and the total money supply on a global scale. However, the price of video games has remained relatively stagnant. It remained stuck at $49.99 MSRP from 1995 to 2012, despite the actual purchasing power of that $49.99 being very different between those years. To understand the actual value of a video game at that time period, we need to adjust these prices for inflation. Here, have a look at this photograph.
Look at this giraffe.
Haha, very funny. This graph
Look at this graph.
now displays how much that game's price would have been like based on 2022 levels of inflation. That $49.99 MSRP on the PlayStation 1 in 1995, that's equivalent to 100 USD in 2022's money. That's right, a PS1 game cost more than a Switch 2 game. And let's not even talk about the NES or, gods forbid, the Atari. Adjusting a price for inflation gets you its real price. Remember that capitalization? Yeah. It puts into perspective the real value of how much that price was actually worth in those times. Also, if you're curious, the listed price is actually named the nominal price. We can see the difference between the real and nominal prices have consistently narrowed over time. This is because the American economy and average wages have grown significantly since 1995, and the resulting inflation that came with that growth has devalued the dollar accordingly. Put simply, $49.99 used to be worth a lot more purchasing power back then because people earned a lot less money back then. This other graph makes the price difference more apparent. Son of a... As we can see by this graph, the real value of $69.99 would have been pretty huge back in the 90s, but it's a lot less in modern times. The truth is that despite the nominal price of games increasing, the real price had actually been steadily decreasing. Games were actually becoming cheaper and more affordable, allowing them to reach a wider audience. Ergo, more demand, more revenue, and theoretically, more profitability. Except, well, not exactly. See, profit has two main components, revenue and costs. And oh boy, did costs increase, as shown by this chart. With advancements in technology came improved consumer expectations. Games and media were now capable of doing so much more than before, and audiences began wanting more and more and more. Creating all that quality is not cheap. Here's a good example. This is Dave the Diver. This game sold for 20 USD and had a team of 5 to 25 people. Tell me, how much do you think this cost to make? Their total budget was under $10 million. Yeah, you want a good game? You need a couple $1,000,000 and a couple years. If you seriously think making a good game is as simple as putting 12 guys in a room, you're honestly kidding yourself. Running a game studio is expensive, even an indie one. You need programmers, artists, designers, music and audio, QA testers, producers, localization and translation, and so much more. You need equipment like computers and software. You need to pay rent for a workspace, utilities and communications, taxes, and all sorts of other costs. If you want more quality, you need to hire more staff, pay for more resources, and rely less on outsourcing. As you continue to scale upwards, you also need to appoint additional producers, managers, and HR who don't even do any development work and focus on keeping track of the entire mess. That is a lot of salaries. And there is also time. At the end of the day, games need time and time is money. Making a good game is a marathon. This isn't a game jam. You can't expect to crunch for 24 hours with no sleep for years non-stop. People need to rest, which means time and therefore cost. Hiring more people can help reduce time by increasing cost, but only so far. Some tasks are dependent on other tasks being finished, and there will be lag times due to communications, delays, logistics, and need for rest. No amount of people you hire can overcome that. After a certain point, you start getting diminishing returns with each new hire. Eventually, you may end up with negative returns. Looking at you, Ubisoft. Oh, if you need money, you can just crowdfund on Kickstarter. No! Shovel Knight crowdfunded around 328,000. That number sounds impressive, but it was nowhere near enough. Their estimated development cost just for the base campaign was $1.44 million. They only barely managed to finish development by shifting multiple features to post-launch updates after they listed their game on Steam. These guys were efficient too. They had 6 people and took only 2 years. But despite this, they still ended up working 5 months without any pay and were getting credit cards declined at supermarkets. By the time everything was completely finished, Shovel Knight's total costs ended up being $9 million. That's why they kept reselling new editions all the time. Thank goodness they sold enough to profit. Even remasters are not cheap. Leisure Suit Larry is an old, simple point-and-click adventure game from the 1980s. You'd think producing a remake would be cheap, since the dev team was just 4 people and is just updating all the existing assets. They needed $500,000, and this was in 2012. That's $700,000 in 2025's money. If you try to keep costs low with fewer people, you just extend your development time even more. Hollow Knight Silksong spent 8 years in development. Deltarune spent 6 years in development just for Chapter 1. Stardew Valley took one absolute mad lad 4 years. He worked 70 hours a week. That's 10 hours a day, every day, including weekends. For 4 years, with no salary. The amount of work required for the game doesn't change. You just end up with fewer people doing more to compensate. This will burn people out. Now, scale those costs upwards to big companies like Nintendo, which employ teams of a few hundred. Their costs are exorbitant, and their prices need to be higher to match. Otherwise, they can't pay their staff. This is why I'm always so angry whenever I hear people demand that games should be cheaper, because they shouldn't. Players don't fully comprehend just how much time and money it costs to make a game. Or worse, they don't care. Game developers already work killer hours and struggle to pay bills as is. And now you are saying all that effort is for an audience of people who refuse to even pay for it? What do they expect us to do? Work for free? Some devs already do that. I swear, the attitudes of some gamers just make my blood boil. There were times back in the industry where I wanted to scream. I felt like a fool being taken advantage of by the most entitled and unappreciative audience in the world. This is why I switched careers from game development to finance, despite studying and working in game development for years. I loved everything about games, but I refused to abandon my family responsibilities in order to spend my life as a starving artist and work myself to death for no money. See, this is what I meant when I said my heart lies in games while my brain handles finance. It's always good to distance yourself from your emotions when dealing with money. Back to business. One last thing we have not yet considered is the type of company that Nintendo is. I talked about costs, but those are just developer costs. They aren't all of the costs involved in a game. There's marketing, publishing, legal, logistics, localization, distribution, and so on. These are costs which game studios don't need to worry about. Instead, they are borne by publishers and platform owners, which already have specialized, established infrastructure and can therefore minimize costs. This is why games on Steam are so cheap and go on sale so often. Valve does not bear any of the costs of development or publishing. The only cost they need to cover is operating Steam as a platform. Steam's business model is to maximize total transactions and take a percentage cut on each individual game sale. Because Steam has a library consisting of hundreds of thousands of games and a user base of millions, they can rely on sheer numbers to turn a profit. Being a digital platform also reduces physical production and logistic costs. That is Valve's greatest asset as a company. Publishers Publishers and developers in turn rely upon these sheer numbers to compensate for their high costs. Nintendo differs from this because they are the entire chain. They have their own in-house studios, handle their own publishing, and manage their own platform, meaning they bear the full cost of everything. They also have a comparatively smaller user base and games library. Their business strategy thus differs from Valve. They maintain high prices because they bear more risk. Their game prices need to cover the full cost of development, publishing, marketing, and platform management. These prices also help fund innovation because the higher profits from successful games helps offset the costs from less successful titles. Games like ARMS, Star Fox, and Pikmin weren't as successful as other titles like Animal Crossing or Mario Kart, but because Nintendo's games maintain a consistent revenue stream, they can afford to take risks with inventing new IPs until they inevitably stumble into a Splatoon. This is also why they are so resistant to discounts. They don't have the sheer user base numbers which Steam has, so the boost in sales they get is too low to be worthwhile. It benefits them more to avoid training their customers to wait for discounts and pay the full price. Additionally, it's also why Nintendo is encouraging digital sales so much. It removes the retailer from the overall chain of production and thus grants them a higher profit margin. All of this is possible due to Nintendo's greatest strength as a company, its portfolio of exclusive first-party IPs and reputation of quality. Customers who value the latest games belonging to those IPs have no choice but to accept Nintendo's prices. We must also consider the console's future lifespan. I mentioned before that inflation is constantly happening. That will hold true even 8 years from now. Switch 2's MSRP is not a price based on 2025. It's based on the future. Whatever price they set would be the standard throughout the entire console's lifespan, which might last for a decade. They don't have the flexibility to raise prices mid-console generation. In other words, that $79.99 would stay as nominal price even after 5 to 10 years of future inflation diminishes its real value and profitability. Alright, so game prices will be high. What can we do about it? Not a whole lot. The reality of increased costs, the economy, and Nintendo's very structure mean that game prices are not likely to come down, barring severe sales backlash. Which is not likely to happen because Nintendo caters to a very casual audience who is very excited for the Switch 2 and is fairly used to paying for more expensive things than the occasional video game. There are a few small things we could do to offset prices, like not buying at launch or only buying digital to avoid retailer markups on MSRP, sharing games with friends and family, or only buying third parties through Steam for discounts. The Switch One also still has a significant lineup of upcoming games. We recently had 2 whole directs just to showcase that. You can still entertain yourself without purchasing a Switch 2. Like, they got Marvel! But these are all just putting band-aids on a stab wound. It doesn't solve any real core financial issues. We're just going to have to make compromises with our leisure expenses soon. I really wish I had some magic advice to help, but I really don't. Reality reflects financials, and financials are where dreams go to die. The world economy is just not in a good place right now, and pretending otherwise won't change that reality. Rising costs on essentials due to tariffs, job insecurity due to AI, wage stagnation, wealth inequality, worldwide economic disruption, an incoming trade war, and so on. Compared to the numerous financial issues in the world, I fear that we don't really have the luxury to complain about something as minor as higher game prices. There's a lot of people who are about to experience very real economic hardship, especially those living paycheck to paycheck. Buckle up everyone. Financially, we're all in for a rough couple years ahead. This video ends on a depressing note, but that's world economics for you. There's no fun in that. I'm sure the next video will be more lighthearted. There's a lot more I left out about economics, but this video has gone on for long enough. Hopefully, it was educational in some way. If you learned something, do let me know what it was. Teachers love feedback and whatnot. For now though, I've talked way too much about business and economics. I really need a drink.